So let's talk about what our goals here are today. By the way, people, if you don't have a piece of paper and you want to, we're going to be referring to these pieces of paper and their pencils. So my goal is to give you some ideas of how you can set up your own longevity plan. And last week we talked broadly about longevity, and now I want to go into details of there are about 108 or 112 things that you can do. And I want you to take your piece of paper, and when you think something applies to you, just mark it down. And I'm going to go on it, I'm going to go to them in detail. They're more in the first part in the physical sphere. So there are, to remind you, 5 spheres, I think, that really affect your life. A physical sphere, a brain, mind, and mood sphere, which I call the mental sphere, a social sphere, your social situation that you're in, a spiritual sphere, whatever nourishes not just your heart, we're talking about in here, but your soul, and a material and environmental sphere, where you live, how you live, etc. You know, if you live in a highway, in a neighborhood that is very dangerous, that clearly affects your life. We know, for instance, that if you live near a highway, that there's more pollution, and it really affects children growing up. They have higher lead levels and so on. So that may be their first step. And the idea is to give you then 3 steps that you can take, and I'll talk to you about how we're actually going to do that and how we set up 3 steps. And feel free to ask questions and harangue me in between. Okay, so let's look at toxins. Once again, look at your sheet of paper. I am a smoker. If you're a smoker, obviously you should stop. We still have 16% of the state of Wisconsin who still smoke. I've never quite understood why poverty is associated with smoking. I don't really understand that. We know everyone knows that you shouldn't smoke, but why is it when you don't have any money, you still want to go buy a pack of cigarettes for $8 to $10? I don't really understand that connection, and there really is no one who really understands that connection. Well, this is all, if you don't have much money, at least you can smoke. WTF? What does that mean? And if you don't know what WTF means, by the way, because I will be saying that, sorry, Mom, I didn't say the F-bomb. If you don't know what it is, ask your neighbor, but you can understand what's the, and you figure out what that is in between. You figure it out. Sometimes WTF is appropriate. By the way, when I say that in my office, if I ever use the F-bomb, people are like, oh my God, you know that word? Why would you say it in here? That was always the worst word. Okay, I drink more than 2 bottles of beer, wine, or shots of alcohol a day. Now, for women, the question is, should it be 1 or 2? There's a question that concerns liver and heart disease. 1 is certainly safe. 2 may be safer, may not. For men, it's 2. So I always say no more than 14 drinks a week, not to be taken on Saturday nights. You know, we are a society where alcohol is a big thing. Now, in my family, my grandfather came over. On one side came from England. He had 3 kids. And the other side, and then I found out through Ancestry.com, I wondered how they're Jewish, how my family is all Ashkenazi Jew, how they were in England, because Jews were not in England in 1900. And it turned out his parents, my great-parents, came from the Ukraine, which I didn't even know existed. But anyway, that was a family of 3. My other side, my grandfather, they had 6 kids, came over with 1 child, and then they had 5 more kids. And he worked in a dry cleaning place, sewed and hemmed and did dry cleaning. And then during the Depression, lost a bunch of money that's saved in the bank. He worked helping the milkman deliver milk, and then at nighttime would go down to the Morrison Hotel and handed out towels for tips. And that's how he kept sort of, you know, all these 6 kids growing, who then grew up, my dad and others, to become just, you know, Americans, you know, kind of interesting. And my grandparents all spoke Yiddish, but my parents never spoke Yiddish. And they must have understood it. And they're all dead, so I can't ask them about it. Well, that's the way it goes. I don't know how I got off on that. Anyway, there was a reason. Nobody in my family drinks. When we have a family picnic, I just went to Chicago, and there were like 40 people there, and there was no beer and no wine. And it's so interesting, because you could look at that in one of 2 ways. Either it's not their culture and they don't drink, or they're all alcoholics, and they're on the wagon, and that's why there's no alcohol involved. Okay. Next one, I use marijuana on a regular basis. Marijuana, I think, is okay. Marijuana right now, the federal government, in their infinite stupidity, put it in the same class as cocaine and heroin, and that is dumb and stupid. And they could take it out by just saying, we're not going to do it, we're going to move it into the same realm. So you have OxyContin that kills people, and you have marijuana that doesn't. And OxyContin, of course, is safe. No, it's not safe unless you really need it, and marijuana is really safe. And I mention that because eventually we'll have medical marijuana in Wisconsin. We should have it. Our our legislators, in their divine stupidity, do not have it for medical marijuana when it's been around for others. And it's far safer than opioids. And for some people, it really helps them. And if you wonder if it helps you, go down to Illinois, go to South Beloit, go to a dispensary, get some gummies, and see if it works for you. You know, if you have chronic pain, it may work. It's better than opioids. Opioids cause constipation, and if somebody gets into the cabinet, like a teenager who's visiting you because you're all old, a lot of old people here, you just make sure you lock it up. But seriously, I think medical marijuana is fine. Now, you've got to be careful, by the way, because a number of ER visits across the country are filled with baby boomers and seniors who go down and take a gummy, which has, I think, like 10 milligrams of whatever it is, THC, in it, and then end up being, I'm serious. And then they go to the ER, they're embarrassed to say that it was marijuana or the people around them, and they end up getting a full workup, and when they wake up, it's that. So you have to be very, very careful. It's like any other thing you take. It's like, drinking too much alcohol. And the next thing you might check out, do I use opioids, ecstasy, or other hallucinogenics? So those are toxins. But if you use marijuana every day, it can be a toxin, just like if you get drunk every day. I wouldn't do it. So let's look at food. I don't have an idea what good nutrition is. If you don't, look on the web. Start to read about it. I'm going to talk today on News 3. On the show, as I said, about 4:40, about the importance of health literacy. Health literacy is very important. And I mentioned the last time, I still remember when I first started practice, I had a young woman, I couldn't cure her urinary tract infection. And the reason ultimately was, I gave her different antibiotics. It said 1 tablet twice a day, so she took one at about 8 o'clock in the morning and took the second one at about 8:05 in the morning, because she didn't want to forget the second pill. Well, that's health literacy. She didn't understand twice daily meant maybe in the morning, maybe in the evening. So health literacy, I mentioned that because if you don't know what good nutrition is, do it. The Mediterranean diet is by far the best diet. The research shows that a Mediterranean diet, which has plentiful fruits and vegetables, 5 servings a day, which 40% of Americans do not get, fish twice a week, not fish oil, fish. Find fish you like. I mean, in our house, all we had for dinner was Mrs. Grass's fish sticks. And I bought them about a year ago to see what they tasted like. You can imagine what they tasted like. They didn't taste like the Culver's fish sandwich, let me tell you that. And I realized why I didn't like fish when I was a kid. Salmon is really good, sardines, fatty fish are better, but any fish is good. Fish oil is not the same as fish, even though 1 out of 6 senior citizens take it. If you think it's the same as fish, you're fooling yourself. All you have to do is bite into a delicious piece of teriyaki salmon, which I like, and bite into some fish oil, and you can see what the difference is right away. And if you take fish oil because you believe in it, once again, no good data on all on fish oil. It does lower triglycerides, but heart attacks and strokes maybe. But if you don't do it, if you have burps that are really awful for you and others, put the fish oil in the freezer. For whatever reason, you don't get the burp when you do it. And take it at nighttime, so no one knows if you're burping, unless the person next to you has insomnia, in which case they'll kick you out of bed. Food, you eat too much. That's, if you eat too much, that's a toxin. Once again, check things that apply to you. I am overweight. Check that if that applies to you. I don't follow a Mediterranean. I don't eat 5 servings of fish. I don't eat fish. I eat red meat more than 3 times a week. Now, you can eat red meat in small amounts. You may have it more often. And I do enjoy good steak on the grill. I definitely do. But I don't have it all the time. And who can afford it anyway, even if you go to Aldi? It's expensive, but you may use it for that. But if you eat too much red meat, it's not good. And I remember I always talk about, red meat, white meat is good, and the pork producers want you to say pork is the new white meat. No, poultry is better than pork, once again, from the fat point of view. Now, I don't get enough fiber from beans, nuts, whole grains, fruits, and veggies. So if you don't, Metamucil. How many of you have ever taken Metamucil? Come on, you're seniors, admit it. Come on. That's all. Metamucil is great for fiber. It's wonderful. They're now advertising the right way. They're talking about it as a bowel cleanser. I can't remember what and who owns it. I think it's not General Mills, but it's a big company. And they talk about the Metamucil challenge. But Metamucil is the husk of psyllium seed. And those husks, by the way, come from India. They produce the most of it. So they're husks. They don't dissolve. So when you take it, you take a scoop, you mix it around and drink it. And if you don't drink it right away, it'll be like Jell-O. And it's not like the lime Jell-O when you were a kid. By the way, in Utah, lime jello is the state jello. It's how much lime jello they have. It's amazing how many odd facts I have in my head that I'm sharing with you. But anyway, Metamucil is great. And it's wonderful. It really is great fiber. It's really good for your bowels. You're more likely to have a good bowel movement with it. And 1 scoop a day, you can have generic. The name brand, I think, tastes better than the generic. If you have it flavored, it comes flavored, and I think it has sucralose in it. It may have something to sweeten it up. You really don't need to. But that is a great way of getting fiber if you want to get more fiber. And fiber reduces cholesterol and reduces the risk of heart attacks. So think about that. But beans, nuts, whole grains, fruits, and veggies are a way to get it. And beans are a great way. Beans are inexpensive, high protein, vegetable protein, something you ought to have every day. Common in many cultures, like in Mexico, beans and rice. My daughter-in-law comes from from Rio de Janeiro, and they have beans and rice every day. And why? Because they're complementary proteins. What's missing in rice is present in beans and so on. So, look for fiber. Pardon?
What do you think about this advertising on the fruits and veggie capsules?
Bullshit. That's all. Bullshit. I would say bull. Sorry, Mom, but it's bullshit. Fruits and veggies capsules, right. They want to get your money, and they're advertising. Bullshit. That's right. It doesn't smell like bullshit, but it doesn't taste like bullshit, but it is bullshit. Yeah, it doesn't do anything at all. Yeah. Let me tell you how to get something through a capsule. Why? We like to swallow capsules because we think they're going to help us. And the reality is, go to Mother Nature. When in doubt, it's Mother Nature. That's what you do. Go back, not to a totally traditional way we used to eat. Because if you look at, quote, paleo diets, they really weren't very good because they didn't have fruits and vegetables. And the fact is, protein was really expensive to get. Back in the day, if you look back in the day, even when Herbert Hoover said a chicken in every pot, he meant because chicken was an expensive form of protein. It only became a cheap form of protein over the last maybe 40 years. I remember my mother would serve mock chicken. Does anyone remember mock chicken on a stick? It was made of veal. It wasn't made of chicken because veal was cheaper than chicken. Figure that out, right? I mean, now veal is really expensive. We don't eat a lot of veal, but it was cheaper than chicken. Mock chicken made of veal. Who knew? Okay, next thing. Do you drink too many sugary drinks? We know that's bad for you. Look at the Slurpee. 12 ounces of Coke is 12 teaspoons of sugar. 12 ounces of orange juice, 12 teaspoons of sugar. You don't want to drink, you do not want to get your calories through anything, including orange juice. If you're going to have orange juice, have 6 ounces or 4 ounces. I mean, think about the glass that your mom would serve when you were around orange juice when you were young. It was probably a 6-ounce glass. It wasn't 12 or 16 ounce. Don't fool yourself. Don't get those calories through there. I consume too much salt. Americans do consume too much salt. And what you want to do is reduce that. So when you're cooking, let's say soup or something else, don't put salt in it, or whatever you're making. But get kosher salt. Now, kosher salt is is the same salt. Salt is the same no matter what. But if you look at kosher salt, the crystals are larger. We taste salt through our tongue. Our tongue is only sugar, salt, sweet, sour, and something called umami, which is sort of fullness. Everything else actually comes through our nose. And the reason why we don't taste things well when we're sick is our nose is stuffy, so we don't taste it. But it's really through our nose. But salt, when it's on the tongue, triggers something that we like. So put some salt with big grains on the top, or get a salt grinder of the food you're eating, because the salt in the middle of the food that you take a bite of will not activate the salt trigger in your tongue as much as the salt on the surface when you pick it and put it on your tongue. So that's the way to do it. Little salt on the surface, and don't cook with salt, and you will cook down.
Kosher salt is iodized?
No, kosher salt is not. Well, some kosher salt is not. Most of it is not, and that's a good point. So you have to have some iodized salt in it. Now, getting back to that, we used to be in what was called, it was called the goiter belt. And the goiter belt was, if you remember, lots of men and women, especially women, because they needed more thyroid produced when they were having children. We were in the goiter belt, and Jackson, anyone remember the Jackson Clinic? Yeah. So the Jackson boys, that's what they were, made their money out of taking off goiters because goiters were so prominent. Arnold Jackson was the last one. He was a character. He dressed in surgeons had, at that time, dressing gowns. They weren't disposable. And he wanted to have a satin dressing gown and wanted to have a satin mask on him. And he was quite a character, and there's still money in a Jackson Foundation from that, because he would do maybe 5 or 6 goiter operations in a day. That's all he did. We don't see goiter anymore because of iodized salt. And so you do need some iodized salt. A lot of prepared food has iodized salt. And while we're at it, the reason why we don't see rickets, beriberi, pellagra, and others is because around World War II, the manufacturing companies, the company that made Hostess cream-filled cupcakes and Twinkies, and all of you have undoubtedly tasted that sometime in your lifetime, made Wonder Bread, which, quote, builds strong bodies in 12 ways because they had vitamins and minerals. And the federal government wanted them to do it, enriching flour, because enriched flour got rid of vitamin diseases. And we now have folic acid in flour, too, that helps get rid of spina bifida, which is on the mend, because you need to have that in-house in a woman's body prior to about, I think, the 2nd or 4th week of pregnancy. So it's important to do that. And that's enriched salt. But anyway, you bring up a good point. And if I'm going too quickly, sorry. That's the way my brain works. I ate too many salty snacks or prepared foods. So if you do it, I mean, think about Cheetos. Cheetos. What are they? They're basically fat-laden salt stuff that has been engineered to make us feel really, really good until we've eaten half the bag. And then we feel guilty and want to go and do penance. I'm not Catholic, so I don't know exactly how to do penance. But if you are, it's, 6 Our Fathers and 10 Hail Marys. But anyway, so we have to be very careful about salty snacks and sweet snacks. We are a snack-laden society. I don't know if you paid attention to it, but Hostess, which was in bankruptcy about 10 years ago, and Twinkies were off the shelves for about 8 months, got bought by another company and is now owned by Smuckers. And they've increased the number of people who eat Twinkies, Hostess cupcakes, and others, because we're a snack-laden society. So be careful with your snacks. I might consume too many sweets, candies, and desserts. It's okay for some. I don't consume calcium-rich foods. That's important. You probably need 1,000 milligrams of elemental calcium every day, especially women, but women and men. So how do we get it? A container of yogurt has roughly 400 or 500 milligrams. And if you take a container of yogurt and you love it every day, take it every day. It supports the dairy industry, which of course our state is, that's our state's industry that we love. But there's a difference between calcium in food and elementary calcium, which tastes like chalk because it is chalk. That's what it is. But a Tums every day, read it, is about 500 milligrams. You don't want to take 1,000 milligrams at one time because there's data that too much calcium in the bloodstream suddenly may be associated with cardiac arrhythmias. I used to say take 1,000 milligrams all at one time, and I don't say that anymore. It's a theoretical question, but it's really there. If you take 1,000 milligrams on an empty stomach, the calcium levels rise an hour later. And if you're prone to arrhythmias, there's a theoretical chance you may be doing harm. So calcium 500 milligrams once a day. Could be oyster, Oscal 500 with vitamin D. That'll be fine. Don't forget, and we'll talk about vitamin, 2,000 milligrams of vitamin D every day. We'll get into that. I don't drink 6 glasses of water a day. This whole thing about 8 glasses of water, that was along with Kellogg, who thought that cornflakes were good, and in his spa was giving high colonic enemas to people to try to improve their lives. That's where he made his money. High colonic enemas. We think of him as just cornflakes. He's dead. But actually, they were big on enemas back 100, 125 years ago because they really thought that was important. And actually, high colonic enemas were very big in the late 80s, early 90s, until we found out that they weren't sterilizing the machines well enough and they were actually spreading AIDS through enemas. And so that kind of stopped. I mean, who needs an enema anyway? But you look at your urine. If your urine is concentrated, you're not drinking enough. That's the way to do it. You don't really need 6 or 8 glasses a day. That's all incorrect. I'll say bull for that. I won't add the shit at the end of it. But it's incorrect. But you probably need 4 to 6 a day, certainly in the summer. I eat too much fast food. Once again, you're marking this down for you, and there's a reason. We'll get through all this. Okay, accident prevention. I should use a seatbelt, but I don't all the time. I often don't drive safely. I don't wear a helmet when riding a bike, motorcycle, skiing, or ATV. Big issue. I've got a good friend. She died. Not because of that, but she was a biker, a very avid biker. She was a ski buddy. She always liked to be down at the bottom of the hill. She's with her husband, retired. They're biking in Ireland, and everything is reversed. You're not on the right side, you're on the left side. She went around a corner much too quickly. There was a truck with sheep in it. She went into it, and 20 seconds later, her husband came by, 30 seconds later, and she was DOA with blood down there. So she wore a helmet, but she was going too fast. And she didn't know what she was doing. She's going around a corner, a blind corner, and she died. So, we want to reduce that. I don't use sunscreen when I should. There are two types of sunscreen. Zinc oxide is sort of the major, you can think of sunscreen that is used by lifeguards. It's that white stuff, and it's a barrier. It's actually little zinc crystals that reflect the sun. Very important for babies. If you look at babies, they say infant sunscreen. They have zinc oxide, or they have another element, I can't remember, that reflects the sunlight. All the other sunscreen is a chemical sunscreen that also works quite well. You can use it, once you get over 15, SPF of 15, you're okay. You can get 30 or 60 or 90, and it makes a little difference because it'll last longer, but you have to reapply it. Find a sunscreen that you find that you like, because that's the one you're going to use, and buy more than one. So I happen to like one made by Neutrogena. It comes in a stick that looks like a deodorant stick, those deodorant sticks that you use, and you can use it on your face so your hands don't feel gooey and icky. And I put one in the car in the summer because I'm often in the car. And where's the sunscreen? At home, in the bathroom, up on the shelf, on the second floor, and I'm too lazy to get up. So get a bunch of different sunscreens. Get what you like. Sprays are good. And put them all over. You can afford it. Go to Walmart. Don't go to Walgreens. They're more expensive. Go to Walmart. No-name sunscreen is great. That's in Walmart. But use it around, because that's important. Basal cell carcinoma is common, I would say, at least 50% of you have had a basal cell carcinoma or the precursor to that. Squamous cell can spread, and of course melanoma is a big issue because it can kill you. And that's what Jimmy Carter has. Is he still alive? It's amazing. And his wife, Rosalind. He, by the way, is really moving a lot of people, I heard it on NPR, towards the idea of hospice, which I think is important. I'm going to go into that for a second. It's never too early to call hospice. People think, once I give up hospice, I'm giving up everything. The answer is no. You're giving up active things for what you can do. You can't go in the hospital and look up new problems. But there are many people who are really end stage, and the hospice comes in and does wonderful things. And if you decide you don't want hospice, once you decide that, you're off of hospice. You're not, if you go, no, I want mom to go in the hospital and get worked up for this, once you get in the ER, because it's Medicare Part A, hospice ends and you can go and do things. But you should think of hospice as palliative care. It's very important, because in America we think, well, we'll just try another chance to get rid of that cancer. And often you're not going to get rid of that cancer, and you're going to cause nausea and vomiting. My brother-in-law, who died of a lymphoma probably about 5 years ago in Florida, he wanted to go into hospice, and his wife and kids said, no, Gary, you've got to fight it. And he went in and out of the hospital the last 6 months of his life like 3 or 4 times. Who wants to be in the hospital? I don't care how nice it is. Surrounded by people you don't know with tubes in you, who will then, and he didn't even have a DNR when he was in the hospital. He finally got home. Do not resuscitate. Do you really want to die with somebody banging on your chest who you don't know, trying to revive you, when the chances are you're not going to survive? So you have to think about that. And it's not just cancer that may be there. It may be heart failure. So we have to look towards hospice. And Jimmy Carter, because he's in hospice, is starting to look at that. I don't wear a life preserver when I should, when I'm in the lake. I don't swim, even though I go boating. Got to wear a life preserver. I'm a senior citizen who gets on high ladders. Stupid, dumb, high ladders. I can't tell you how many people break their hips because they go up on high ladders cleaning the damned gutters because they've been doing it since they were 20. Well, guess what? You were 20 when you were 20. You weren't 70 when you were 20. You don't have the same balance. You don't have the same issues to be able to do it, and you don't have the same resiliency when you fall. I had a guy last year, really nice guy, used to fly airplanes, and he got up, there were things on the tree. He wasn't in the gutters. He was sawing it down. The branch came, took him down, broke 6 ribs. He has chronic pain. No, he broke 6 ribs. He was in the hospital, I don't know, for a week or 2, and it's all because he wanted to get that branch that was up there. This affects men more than women, but it also affects women. When I was in practice initially in Oregon with Drs. Kellogg and Dukershine, Kellogg came there in 49, Duke in 52. Margaret died a few years ago, and I always have permission if I talk about people specifically, that it's okay to talk about them. Margaret, she was 92, 94, and there was a light bulb that needed changing. And her daughter said, don't worry, I'll change it tomorrow. Well, her house was so clean that you could eat out of the corner of the garage on the floor. And there was not a speck of dust. She was, she was obsessive compulsive, beautiful house, wonderful housekeeper, got up on a chair to change the light bulb, fell down, broke her back, 2 fractures, and then she was in severe pain and died like a week later. Died because she said, I don't live anymore, the pain is too bad. Because she wanted to change the light bulb because she didn't want to ask her daughter, who said, I'm going to change the light bulb. A lot of people here suffering from a terminal disease I call stubbornness. I own firearms, but I don't keep them safely stored. Very important. Got to keep it safely stored. You don't have it. I have ammunition in the house, but I don't have it in a secure place. Really important. Important because they're kids and teenagers. How many children under the age of like 12 are going to be maimed by another child because they pick up a gun? It happens. And I found out from my son Zach, who's now 45, and he never told me that he was in his friend's Mike's house, and they're playing with a revolver in the house, shooting it around. And I said, oh, no, it's not loaded, and all of a sudden shot it, and it went through the ceiling. This is my son Zach, right? My son, our son, stupid and dumb. He never told us, and never told us for good reason. We would have never let him go and see to Mike's house. And he's still friends with Mike, who lives out in California. And he's an okay guy, but he was a little rowdy. He just took out this revolver and did it because the gun was loaded and didn't know it, and he was a stupid kid because he was 12. We all remember, well, you may not remember when you were 12. Actually, he's funny because we have 4 kids, and he was saying the other day, he was in high school when Vanessa was like in elementary school, and he said, Vanessa, I don't remember you around the house when I was in high school. That's because he was in high school. It's very funny. She said, Zach, I knew that when I was in elementary school. Screening tests. I haven't kept up with cancer screening. Cervical, breast, prostate, and colon. Okay, let's talk about that. Cervical cancer, it's caused by human papillomavirus, HPV. You don't need to be screened after the age of 65. In fact, the risk is so minimal. We now do HPV test, and then we may do a PAP with it, but it's done the same way. It's done once every 5 years for women of a certain age, and I can't remember exactly what it is, but it's over the age of 30. Before that, it depends on, it's every 3 years or 4. And you do that until around 65. But if you have a monogamous relationship, and you know it's a monogamous relationship, once you're over probably 45, you really don't have to be checked. Breast cancer, we know the data is good there for mammograms. Believe it or not, breast cancer is more common over the age of 75. But the reality is we don't actually have data that shows that screening helps reduce the risk of death. Why? Probably because breast cancer is slower growing over the age of 75. I still recommend that women get squishograms. That's what my patients have called them. But the reality is the data is low on that. So when I would have a woman in the office and said, I don't want to do a breast cancer, I don't want to get breast cancer screening, I don't want to have it, I don't like the feeling, it's very unpleasant, I'll say the data from the feds doesn't actually show that it turns overall mortality. So when we talk about overall mortality, we have to include everything that can kill us. That's what they do. So you may not die of breast cancer, but you may die of heart disease. But anyway, you should be screened, certainly for colon cancer, prostate cancer. the feds gave it a flunking grade. Then the main lobby, which were the urologists, said, no, you can't give it a flunking grade. Instead of an F, you've got to give it a D-. And the reason is you are less likely to die of prostate cancer. The data shows that, but you are more likely to die of something else like heart attacks and stroke. So the global data doesn't show you've saved everything. Now, if you find out you have prostate cancer in a man, chances are 95% you're either going to get radiation or surgery. No difference in mortality and outcomes. Radiation and surgery, same mortality and outcomes. So you get to choose. Both have side effects, erectile dysfunction, dribbling that may occur for your entire life or may not occur, and occurs in 30 or 40% of the time. And most surgeons will say, on my watch, it doesn't occur. And my answer to that is bullshit. You're just not looking. Okay, but I recommend colon cancer. That's still, the data's really good. That's coming closer. We don't know now. It's the age of 45. We're seeing it in 25-year-olds. When I first started practice, we just did proctoscopy with a rigid process, proctoscope. I knew how to do that, which was very painful. But 90% of all the cancers were within the reach of the proctoscope, and that changed over my lifetime. Now it's through the entire colon. Cologuard, just as good if you're at low risk, no doubt about it. And you should be able to get it on Medicare. It's on Medicare Part B. You should be able to get that. Yes?
You can't get the one you're just talking about without a colonoscopy.
No, you can get a Cologuard. You don't need a colonoscopy for Cologuard. Absolutely not. If you're low risk, you can get a Cologuard and never get a colonoscopy. And we don't know if it's every 3 to 5 years or that. If your doctor said you need a colonoscopy first, maybe you're at risk or maybe they're not informed. You don't need a colonoscopy to start out. You can start a Cologuard at 45. Right now, you have to do it every 3 years. My guess is it's going to go to every 5 years. But right now, it's every 3 years. If it's positive, it picks up a number of false positives. So if it's positive, then you need a colonoscopy. The real issue is Cologuard is just as sensitive as colonoscopy. No, it has to be ordered by your doctor. You can't order it. Send a note on my chart and say, I want to have Cologuard. I don't want to have a colonoscopy, and they should do it. And if they don't do it, maybe you switch doctors. Ask them, why aren't you doing it? The data shows. Yeah, right. But you can also tell, I heard this is the same, and if they say, no, you should get a colonoscopy first, say, I'm at low risk, I don't want a colonoscopy first. Right. Show me the data that I need a colonoscopy first. You want to say that? Where's the science? The science, it isn't good enough to say, well, I think you should get it. Where's the science? I want the science when it comes to something like that. And Cologuard is really good because, you think about it. You really want to be put to sleep, take that stuff overnight where you have to, go in the bathroom. By the way, it's not painful at all when you actually take Go Lightly. It's just hard to drink it because it's a lot of fluid, unless you're the one who drinks like 12 cans of beer a day, in which case it probably seems okay. And if you decide you're going to flavor it, remember, you won't want to drink that flavor on other things. That's it. Okay. Blood pressure, really important. Only 60 to 70% of the people actually who have hypertension are treated to goal. Goal is pretty much, I would say, goal always is close to 120/80. That's really goal. But for many people, it may be a little higher. You have to talk to your doctor. It may be more like 130/80 or 85. And that often means you need to be on more than one pill. People don't like to admit, hey, I need 2 pills or 3 pills. But the data shows that you have fewer side effects and better control on multiple medications after a certain age than you do on one medication. So hydrochlorothiazide, good example. We used to give 100 milligrams when I started. Now we give 25 milligrams, which is it's a diuretic, but it doesn't cause diuresis. It does at the 100 milligram dose. But that combined with something called an ACE inhibitor or a beta blocker turns out to work really well. So you often need to be on 2 or 3 pills. People don't like to take 2 or 3 pills. Why? Well, it's the same reason you don't want to admit that you're old. You don't want to admit you need 3 pills. WTF. If you need 3 pills to get you to go, do it. Do it before the stroke and before the heart attack versus afterwards. You need to be at goal.
Is salt responsible for other?
Salt for some people is responsible. But the reality is it's mostly genetics. That's what it is. And it's age. That's what it's genes and age. So if you're salt sensitive, go on a low salt diet, which nobody can really follow because it doesn't taste very good. But go on a reduced salt diet and see if your blood pressure is good. Get an Omron home blood pressure cuff, OMRON, Omron. I don't know if any of you have heard of Amazon, but do Omron blood pressure cuff. The one for $39.95 is just as good as the one for $79.95. The more expensive one just gives you more ways to put down what you actually have for blood pressure. You can always use this to keep track of your blood pressure instead of spending $40 more. But I like Omron. They're very good. Take your blood pressure at home, more accurate than in the office and at home. And if it keeps on being elevated, write a note on my chart to your doctor, say it's elevated at home. They may want to see you. I've got an Omron blood pressure cuff. Talk about measuring it. Get your blood pressure close to 120/80. Most people who have blood pressure in this room need at least 2 pills. And you may need 3. And you want them without side effects. And you just may have to go over one after another. And then people are usually stable after a while. Very important. Blood pressure, since we treated blood pressure aggressively, we've reduced strokes by 75% since I started medicine. Most of that from blood pressure, from cholesterol, from not smoking, and then from dietary changes, and from exercise. But the most important thing in terms of stroke is blood pressure. If we look at heart disease and stroke together for premature death, that outweighs cancer almost by 2 to 1. We worry about cancer causing that because we see people wither in front of us, but the reality is heart disease and stroke are the big boys that we could actually do something about. Got to get your blood pressure checked regularly. If you've got extra $39, get it checked at home. Better way and figure out how to do it. And when you go into the doctor, bring your blood pressure cuff, measure it with your cuff, see how they measure it because they're trained, and see whether or not they correspond. Because if they don't, it may not be the meter you use, it may be the way you put it on. And if you wonder how to put it on, go to YouTube. You've all heard about YouTube because you may have heard about it. Go to YouTube. You can look up the blood pressure cuff like Omron or another one. It'll show you the way to do it, or do the American Heart Association, how to get a blood pressure and see how to do it. Very important. You want to have it. Haven't had your cholesterol checked? I believe that statins are great. They are the only drug shown to lower cholesterol that does anything. Niacin has not been shown to actually reduce heart attack and strokes, even though some still use it. It does reduce triglycerides. No evidence it reduces heart attack and stroke. Acimbi, which is ezetimibe. Ezetimibe is another drug that's very different if you don't tolerate a statin. It does lower cholesterol. It may have an effect. It's gone back and forth with that. Vytorin was a drug. I just have to... But Acimbi and other drugs may work, but the statins are best. Now, if you don't tolerate a statin, a lot of people don't, then have your doctor try a different statin. So if you don't work with Lipitor, there's a drug which is Pravachol, which is a different drug, which is a statin that may work, or go to a minimal dose of a statin or every other day statin. Statins don't just lower cholesterol, they reduce the inflammation around the cholesterol plaques that are in your arteries. And everyone in this room has cholesterol plaques in their arteries. Because you're old. I'm old. I can say that because I'm old. When you're young, you can't call somebody old. It's an insult. But when you're old, it's a joke because we're all old. All right, aspirin. A primary prevention? No. If you don't have any risk factors for heart disease, it hasn't been shown to do anything. I used to put everyone on aspirin. I don't do it now. Why? The first data showed it was worthwhile, but the very good data afterwards doesn't. If you wonder whether or not you should be on aspirin, send a My Chart note to your doctor. If you have diabetes, previous heart attack, you certainly need aspirin. High blood pressure by itself, probably not. It's probably not the case. But I would send a note on My Chart, especially if they put you on aspirin. And baby aspirin, although we don't give it to babies, we used to. We stopped years ago in the time of Jimmy Carter's because we discovered that Ray's was caused, which was a potentially deadly syndrome in children. If they had any viral infection like influenza and took aspirin, it actually called Ray's syndrome, which is a whole bunch of things that ultimately killed a number of kids. So we stopped giving aspirin back in the 70s. I don't take a multivitamin. I now do believe in multivitamins. I go back and forth, but now I figure, hey, $10 a year, 365 tablets on Centrum on sale on Amazon or somewhere else. And a Centrum equivalent is fine. If you buy a generic or any other multivitamin, it should say USP, which means US Pharmacopoeia, which means it dissolves in your bloodstream. If you want to spend more money, go ahead and do it. I don't believe in it. Spend your money on fruits and vegetables. You can spend $10 or $15 a year on a multivitamin, or you can spend $40 to $50 a month. Your choice. I mean, I'd rather spend money on that. 2,000 milligrams of vitamin D, I think it's still good. Vitamin D is the only supplement I think is good. Calcium we talked about. Next, I don't have a good relationship with my healthcare provider, doctor, nurse practitioner, or PA. If you don't, switch. Is it hard to switch? Sure. Are you insulting them? Not really. The people, at least it's been my experience that providers, in our office, they would switch between us. We have a number of providers in Oregon. And, people would switch for one reason or the next. They'd come to my practice or my partner or go to another one. But anyway, you're the one who's getting care. You should not care if they care about you switching. That's really not it. They are giving you a service. They're not your friends. There are people who I really miss, but I don't see them for dinner at their house. That's kind of how I define a friend in some ways. But you have a relationship. If you have a bad relationship, change. And unfortunately, many people don't because they think they're insulting. I don't see my health care provider yearly. You ought to see somebody once a year. I'm not up to date on my immunizations. So remember, you can get the RSV, influenza, and COVID all at the same time. I recommend it all at the same time. The data irrefutably shows they all work together to give you a better immune response to all three. You might be tired the next day, so don't plan on going, to a dance or a wedding. And your arm may hurt, but get it. You can't get the shingles vaccine at the same time. That's at a separate time. But get all three at once. Get it done. Get it over. RSV is one time only and reduces your risk quite significantly, and it's new. I'm not up to influenza and COVID. Okay, I wrote that up. I don't take the pills prescribed for me. A lot of people don't. If you don't take them, why get them? If you don't take them because they have side effects, okay. If you don't get them because they're too expensive, send a note to your doctor. Look at goodrx.com. I did that the other day for my wife's Penny's medication. We had to get her an antibiotic augmentin. And on our drug card at Walgreens with Medicare Part D, it was $40, $38, $40. On goodrx.com, it was $18. I thought, really? How could that be? And then I thought, of course, somebody's making money here. I don't know who it is, but I want to get my money. So go to goodrx.com if you're on something, because there's a lot of fake stuff. I had a guy in my office. I've known him for years, always sort of on the borderline how they're doing financially. He was on Prozac, and I was going to give him a 90-day supply. He said, please don't, it's too expensive for me. I said, well, and I knew he had health insurance because I could see that on the electronic medical record. And I said, what do you mean? He said, well, it cost me $22 a month. Prozac. I said, well, Prozac at Walmart, you go to Walmart? He said, well, that's where I get my drugs. At Walmart. But if he paid cash, it would be $10 for a 90-day supply versus $22 for a 1-month supply. Why didn't they tell him at Walmart? And the reason is the state law doesn't allow the pharmacist to tell them unless you ask. They would like to tell you, but they're gagged because the state law says, no, you can't do that. Now, why is that in the state law? Money, 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 money. I have no idea why. But I know who put it in the state law. A lobbyist who probably wears tasseled shoes. I don't. But it's in the state law. So you got to ask the pharmacist. They'll tell you things that they're not allowed. It's a gag order. It's really weird. It's very strange when I found out about this. I'm not sure it's still in place, but I know it was in place as of last year. And it's one of those things that, I don't care which tribe you're on, the red tribe or the blue tribe, who wants to spend more money at the pharmacy? I mean, this is not a tribal thing, with left versus right. This is something as a consumer we should all have. And by the way, why can't you go and buy cars on Sunday? Anyway, we won't get into that. Okay, I don't see the dentist regularly. Very, very important. You don't floss. Hearing aids, I'm going to talk a little bit about hearing aids. Costco has the best hearing aids, cheap and inexpensive. If you have, if you have another, you want to go to SSM or Dean or the others, you can always compare. But Costco, I think, sells like half the hearing aids now in the country. And they do hearing tests also. Hearing reduces dementia. Let me repeat that. Hearing reduces your risk of dementia and memory loss. Why? Because when you don't hear, you stop interacting with people, among other things. You stop learning. We learn through our ears, not just through our eyes. I listen to audible.com with books. I don't read them through my eyes. I read them through my ears. And people often don't use their hearing aids. Now, hearing is very interesting. When you get a hearing aid, you put it in the morning, you take it out at night every single day, and it will take your brain 6 to 8 weeks or 12 weeks to learn what's going on. Why? Because you'll hear sounds you haven't heard for years, and they'll be very disturbing. And eventually, the brain starts to learn to monitor their sounds and get rid of the sounds that it doesn't need. And I'll give you a good example. Here it is, you're sitting in a restaurant. I don't know what the age is. And somebody at the next table, they were talking around, but you're not paying attention to them. And they said, I had sex with him yesterday. And you heard that. You've actually been monitoring that all along in your subconscious. And when they said the word sex, yours popped up, because yours always pop up when you hear the word sex. I don't care what your age is. If you hear the word sex, it's like, does this apply to me? I don't know what it is. But you've actually been monitoring that all along, but your subconscious knows how to get rid of it. Those sounds, including the sounds on Fish Hatchery Road and others, are very disturbing until your brain learns you don't need them. The new hearing aids are great because they will get rid of sounds from the wind. If the wind is blowing in one ear, it'll go in the other ear. And it has Bluetooth that you can have your teenager set up so you can answer the phone with your hearing aid. Wow! How good is that? You can finally listen to your grandchildren or do it through FaceTime on your iPad. Very important. People do not get enough hearing aids. They don't realize how important it is. According to research published in The Lancet, they think it's responsible, loss of hearing, for about 15, maybe up to 20% of all dementia. That's a huge number. And we all worry about dementia. We do. Healthy habits. I don't exercise for 15 minutes to the point where I'm pushing myself 3 times a week. And 3 times a week, got to push, walk a little quicker, so you feel like you're sweating, you're pushing yourself. But any exercise counts. 10 minutes twice a day just walking around your house is better than nothing. First of all, it'll keep your butt from being sore. And second of all, the data shows just getting up and standing and doing things. So if you don't do it, figure out how to do it. Set up a plan for yourself. Put a knock in there. I don't do any stretching exercises. That's important. I don't do anything for balance. That's important too, because you don't want to fall. It's weight, it's balance, it's their exercise. I don't brush my teeth twice a day. I don't floss or use a water pick. Water pick is just as good as flossing. I floss with those little U-shaped things because to put my hand in my mouth with a floss, I just don't like it. I couldn't do it. I have a big mouth. No, I don't. But anyway, my wife says I do. But you have to figure out how to floss. And I don't get 7-8 hours of sleep time. Now, last night I really didn't sleep well. I'm old. I don't sleep like a baby. But babies don't sleep well either. They wake up every 4 hours. So I did sleep like a baby. I woke up every 4 hours, every 3 to 4 hours. You know, I had to pee, I had to go to the bathroom. I was thinking about things I didn't have to think about. I was like somebody was chasing me. I had cash in, all these weird dreams. But I stayed in bed. And I think that's the important part. So if you don't sleep well, try to figure out a way to do it in a non-drug way. Look at your bedding, look at sleep, rather your sheets. I've got a very good friend. He listens to audible.com at night. He puts in something that's boring. Now he's listening to Confucius because it's so boring that he puts it in his ears and it puts him to sleep. And he's got it set up with an iPod. And I thought that's not a bad idea. You don't want to listen to a mystery. You want to listen to something important. Okay. Let's go to brain, mind, and mood sphere. I worry about my memory. Okay, start to learn. I am not an optimistic person. We talked about the role of optimism in terms of longevity. I talked about that at the first. The Ohio study that showed that people who are optimistic are more likely, if they think the future is something in front of them, are more likely to live longer. And probably because they do a change in health habits. We don't know why. But if you're optimistic that the world is going to be good, you're more likely to change your health habits in a positive way, even though it takes something. So optimism and figuring out a way to make yourself more optimistic, not an easy thing, but it is something. We'll talk about that. I don't read enough. Reading is totally different than watching TV. Watching TV, we know, especially with children, doesn't do anything. But there's reading because when you read, you use your imagination as you're reading. So whether or not you're reading on a screen, on a TV, reading something else, using your imagination because you're thinking about what's going on. And it's really, I don't think it really matters what you read. And I don't, as I told you, I think the crossword puzzle thing is just because people are concentrating more. And I think the data is really very weak on that. But I think reading the data is strong. Reading before you go to sleep is good, much better than looking at a screen. You'll cause more insomnia if you, I'm going to write this down for a second. If you have a screen time before you go to sleep, it's not good. But if your screen turns out to be, something that you're actually looking at, either an iPad or a Kindle, that's different. But a computer is very different, not good for you, for that. But reading is good. I watch too much TV. If you watch too much TV, and when I'm talking about TV, I'm talking about anything in a screen. Figure out a way. This is Brian. TV doesn't do anything to you. Does it dull the mind? I don't know, but it doesn't activate the mind. And we look at it because it relaxes us. That's okay. But there is such a thing as too much. And you know if you're watching too much. I don't have to tell you. I have to spend too much time on Facebook or other social media. Yes, it's a sink. It's a time sink. You know, once I look on Facebook, I find out and I look like a third cousin of somebody I don't know is tending a rabbit in the Far East. And the rabbit is jumping through hoops. Really? Really? It's okay, but I have to be careful because all of a sudden I'm looking at stuff that I don't necessarily, it doesn't do anything. But too much, figure out what it is. If it's hours a day, it's too much. I rarely read about health and wellness. We talked about that. That's health literacy. I rarely try to learn something new outside of my comfort zone. I think that's important to learn new things. If you look at longevity mentors, they try to learn new things. That's important to your brain. This is important. You're stressing your brain. No, I'm not recommending that you go back to algebra. God knows, the quadratic equation, negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared, something minus 4ac. I'm not doing that. I liked it when I was in high school, but something outside of your comfort zone. I would not consider myself to be a lifelong learner. If that's the case, check it. You should. I don't engage in mindfulness activities or meditation. Mindfulness activities and a number of apps are exceptionally good to calm the mind. Tai Chi or yoga. Once again, these are things that you can do. They're made. And we're going to get to the end of this, by the way. Now, here are mood boosters. I often feel depressed. If you do, antidepressants are great. Now, the feds came in years ago. I used to be the medical director of Oregon Manor Nursing Home for about 40 years, a little over 40 years. And the feds came in years ago and said, stop overall to all nursing homes. We don't need to give people in nursing homes tranquilizers like Valium. It wasn't Valium. There were other things, alprazolam, and lorazepam. But they said it's very good to give them antidepressants because that's useful. Antidepressants are great. The older you get, the more likely you are to prone to depression. So treating depression with talk therapy, antidepressants or both, if you find you're low, makes a difference. Now, seasonal affective disorder is a common thing, especially in Wisconsin, in the wintertime. And that can be treated with an SAD light at Amazon for $39.95 for 30 minutes in the morning. I find it really good. I'm not prone to depression, but I get tired around Halloween because it's dark. So for about a month or month and a half, I use this light. I have it this far away from me. I look at my computer in the morning when I'm looking at email. You don't look directly at the light. And I turn it on for 30 minutes. It helps me. I feel like I have more energy. I can't even do it at night. But that's a way. Depression can also be treated, and SAD is important. I get angry too often. If you get angry too often and two is misspelled, oh God, Penny would be so upset. Typo. I get angry too often. Antidepressants are great. They're really great for anyone who gets angry too often. They really work well. I often feel stressed. Once again, the idea is you want to get treated. I think of myself as a worry ward. Once again, this is where you talk to your healthcare provider to see what you can do in terms of either talking to somebody or being on a medication. So let's now go into the third sphere, family and social sphere. We knew and found out how important that was during the time of COVID, because we couldn't hug people. It was terrible. You saw pictures of people who went into the nursing home and they had to look at their relatives, outside of the window. And we know how bad that was. And most of us know somebody. I went to Chicago. One of my cousins died. He had a business in Chicago, and he also raised horses. He was a horse rider in around Fort Worth, Texas. And he was 79 years old, wanted to compete. He was a barrel rider and wanted to compete and win in this rodeo. He'd been doing this rodeo for years, wanted to be the oldest one. And he's with his trainer on the horse that he knew for years. And all of a sudden slumped over the horse and died. But in his happy place. And he didn't fall off the horse. He would have been so happy that he didn't fall off the horse. But when he was in Chicago, it was a funeral, and we could only have, in the synagogue, like 30 people because of that. Now in Texas, which was a different culture, they didn't believe in COVID, even though they got it and died from it. They had a party from there, and then they could hug him. I don't know how much was spread. There was a year and a half into the pandemic. But anyway, I mention that because family activities are important. So let's look at relationship issues. I'm in an abusive relationship. Okay. Good friend of mine, her mother had been married for 50 years in an abusive relationship. And when it was the 50th anniversary, she decided to get a divorce. He'd been abusing her for years. And his relatives said, "You're old, can't you just continue to live with him?" And she said no, because they didn't want to take care of him. So if you're in an abusive relationship or you know somebody, counsel them. I'm not sure what the answer is, but counsel them. I have an unsatisfying relationship. I don't have a committed relationship. Oh, I'd like to be in one. I don't consider myself to have strong social relationships. You've got to nourish those. I spend too much time with negative downer friends. You know, there's some people that we were friends with from years ago that we talk to now, but every time we talk to them, they upset us. Well, do you really want to spend the rest of your life talking to people that upset you? Not necessarily. Now, if they're a relative or somebody who needs you, that might be different. And you may limit that amount of time, but it's time to cull some of those relationships. It's time sometimes for some of us to accent the relationships that we would do if we started. If you wouldn't start a relationship with that person today, why be with them today? Because they may not be, they're not necessarily the same people. I recently had a good friend of mine in medical school. I looked on Facebook. I was wondering where he was. I hadn't seen him in 30 years. Name popped up, and it said he was in the hospital, and I happened to have his phone number. And I called him up, and it turned out that he developed Parkinsonism. When I talked to him, he said, "No, it really wasn't that bad." Well, he was in the UW hospital for 3 weeks, so it was really that bad. And then he's in Madison at Capitol Lakes. Kids brought him up here. And I decided to take him out for a lunch. I hadn't seen him in 30 years. Went to the back of the Union just when the university was starting. You know what the back of the Union is like. And there are all those young people. It was a great taste. You know, we had a brat. But for me, it was like, even though I hadn't seen him in 30 years, it was like we talked yesterday, which was really kind of neat. It's like I have an old friend who came here. But there are other people who I've seen over my lifetime who were not in the same place. We're just in different places. I had my friend Bradley, who was really close with in college, this is a number of years ago. And I saw him, he lives outside of San Francisco, Sausalito. And he came and met me in the car, somebody dropped me off. And by the time I got into the house, I thought, oh my God, I've got to get out of here. I can't stand this guy. And it wasn't just politics. You can put politics aside, but he was in a different place. In college, of course, he had a car, and he always had the most beautiful women. That was part of it. We won't get into that. That's college. I spend too much time with downer friends. I don't get along with family, but I'd like to. Okay, make up. Maybe you can bring it to neutral. That's pretty good. So you can sit at the same Thanksgiving table and not think, I don't want to be with that SCHMUCK. You know, which, by the way, schmuck was the worst thing you could say when I was a kid. In Yiddish, let me tell you what schmuck, because schmuck is now a common word, like dinner with schmucks. Let me tell you what the word schmuck meant in Yiddish. Schmuck meant a man who thought it was this big, but actually it was that big. That was the definition of schmuck. I got to tell you that. It was the worst thing. If I said the word schmuck, my mother would slap me, and she never slapped me. I'm sure probably slapped me once. Maybe that's why I got ivory soap in my mouth. I don't remember. But now you can say schmuck. Interesting how the word has changed. I don't see people that I love enough. Really. Maybe you should. My wife Penny has some medical problems, and they were really getting bad. She's since recovered. And all of our kids, our 4 kids, 3 live out of state. Our 2 daughters came in from Seattle. Our son came in from Boston. And they came in without their spouses. They're all married and their kids, because she was really sick, and she's since recovered. And she's okay. She doesn't mind if I talk about her. 49 and a half years, I talk about her anyway. She talks about me. Anyway, they all came in, and we realized we hadn't been in a room together just by ourselves for the day in the house for 20 years. Because they had come with spouses or other kids. And it was really kind of neat. And when my wife Penny got better, she said, I'm so happy. So they made her happy, she made them happy, and made all of us happy. So it's a multiplier. That's where social relationships fit in. I rarely get hugged and touched. Important. If you don't, massage. It's not quite the same, but let me tell you, touch is important. Social issues. I rarely make and prepare food for other people. Really good. Have people over for dinner. I rarely go out to eat with people I like. I rarely do activities with others I like. Once again, you're checking things that may apply to. I rarely go out to movies, shows, sports, and others with other activities, getting out of the house. I stay at home too much. Big issue. I rarely interact with people older and younger than I am. I think that's really important. I think cross-generational stuff is important. So My partner on Wisconsin Public Radio, Tom Clark, who's 87, is finally retired. He's retired because he fell down, fractured his hip. He had to have a hip replacement. And in 87, it kind of reduced his memory a bit. And he knew it was the right time to hang up the shingle or put down the mic, as radio would say. And now we have a new guy. He's been my producer. His name is Carl. Carl has 2 kids, 6 and 8. He's about the age of my kid, and I now interact more with Carl, and it's fun because he's in a different part of his life. And I think I know it's fun for him to hang out with me because it's another part of my life. Intergenerational interaction is so good. If you're just with old people, most of the time you'll spend time with an organ recital. So 1 hour of an organ recital. Let me tell you my organs, let me tell you about your organs. You know, an organ recital, and let me tell you, an organ recital at 85 is different from an organ recital at 18. It's a different organ recital. And let me tell you, one is more exciting than the other. I just thought of that. It's kind of true, isn't it? And we're all laughing because we all have memories. So I do not enough with my family and friends. I don't belong to a club or organization that interests me. Something you can do. It's great. Social relationships. Find something. Go on the net. Go to the senior center in Fitchburg and stuff. That's what we're doing here. The other thing is pets. Have a pet that you like. We're dog people. We always have a dog. We love dogs. They're cat people. I don't like them. No, I like cats too. I like cats too. But we're dog people. I'm allergic to cats. I do like them. I'm not a fish person. They're okay. Birds. I used to have a bird when I was a kid. But anyway, find a pet you like. Now, we have poodles, and dogs tend to die before we do. And our last dog, who was Ziggy, we were out in Seattle with our daughter, and our dog was at our dog sitter, wonderful person. She was our vet's receptionist. She said, I don't think he's doing very good. And he was intermittently eating plastic and went to the 24-hour vet clinic. They did an ultrasound and said it looks like he ate some plastic. It punctured his stomach. You know, what are you going to do? Well, we could either spend a lot of money, get the stomach fixed, but it went into his abdomen, which meant he'd be on IV antibiotics for 10 days, and might have short bowel syndrome, which means he'd have diarrhea for the rest of his life. And he was 4. So what would that mean? So we decided his dog, and it's unfortunate, but we're going to come back, and it was really tough for us to come back because he was a dog. And we said we were coming back the next day, keep him alive because we want to be with him when he died. And then he died. I got more condolence cards for him, from my patients, than from my dad years ago. But the first thing we did was call the dog person who we got our other dogs from and got another dog. Because we love dogs. But if you don't have a pet and you want to have a pet, do it. There's some people who don't get pets when they're older because they say, I'm going to die before the dog does. I want to get a dog. Really? You think when you die, they're going to put the dog to death? Where'd that come from? I bet somebody else is going to do the dog. They're not going to say, oh, Agnes dies. Let's take him over to Lake Wingra and drown him. Really? Is that what goes on in your brain? I mentioned that to 2 of my patients who were wonderful, who came from Spring Green, because their dog had died, and I knew they were dog people and were talking about it. And I said, don't worry. And then they went out and got 1 dog, but they got 2 dogs, 2 poodles, and who lived. And then they did die before the poodles died. And guess what? They got the dogs. Somebody else took the dogs. That's it. So if you like dogs or cats, get one. It's important. Let's go now into the heart and soul sphere. Okay. I think I should go to church, synagogue, or mosque or temple, but I don't. For many people, that's important. I had a woman who told me, look, it doesn't, I go to church, this church really doesn't appeal to me. And I said, why don't you go to different churches? And she did. She came back a while later and said she went to 10 different churches and found one that she spoke to. Now, I very much am involved with Buddhism. I find it talks to my soul. I am culturally Jewish. My 4 kids have married outside the faith. Remember years ago, if you were Catholic and Lutheran, if a Catholic married a Lutheran, both the people in town were like, oh my God, I'm never talking to them again. Really, Catholic and Lutheran, I mean, they're so similar. No, they're not. They're not similar. They're not the same. Luckily, that's gone to the wayside. There's something in Judaism called Shiva. When somebody dies, you sit Shiva, which means you mourn for a week. And I learned in many Wisconsin towns, if a Catholic girl married a Lutheran boy or vice versa, both parents would sit Shiva because they were upset with them, really. So, but I mention this because you may find something. So Zach married Louisa. Louisa's Brazilian. And they go to the Blackhawk Church, which is on Seminole Highway. Beautiful looking church. I'd like to go in there and kind of see what it's like. I'd really like to I'm really ecumenical and other things. Eli is married to Shah, who's Chinese, who is Taoist. Didi is married to Nicholas, and Nicholas is not a devout Catholic, but his mother is a devout Catholic, brought up, as Catholic. And Vanessa is married to Mitchell, and I don't know whether, but I just mention this because you may find a faith that you like, or it may be secular. Secularism is great. Humanism is wonderful. And let's not forget Unitarianism, which is really sort of God without God. But I mean, they mention that, not really. But anyway, so you may find something there. I don't have a religious or spiritual community that I can relate to. You may want to do that, you may not. I rarely read books of wisdom, the Bible or other works. There are many wise things. I mean, the reason why I did Lincoln's speech is I find that wise. I love reading speeches from wise people because I know I don't have all the answers, and some other people do. I don't take time to pray or meditate when I could, getting in touch with your soul. I don't spend time doing compassionate work. As I mentioned in the beginning, I'm one of the doctors who takes care of the Dalai Lama. For about 12 years, I went to Mayo Clinic. I've known His Holiness as much as you can know someone like that. And what I've learned from him is acts of compassion are your vehicle. That's the most important thing, doing something for someone else. So at Walgreens, when I bought something today, the woman looked at me and said, "Would you like to contribute?" And if they look at me, my answer now is universally yes. If it's somebody like a teenager and they just say, "Do you like to contribute?" They don't look at me, I often don't do it. But now I automatically do it because they've connected with me and I've connected with them. And I always say thank you for the opportunity. So doing compassionate acts for others is important. I don't volunteer for others. I don't spend enough time with Mother Nature. There's something in Japan called forest bathing. Why do we like the windows? Look out of the windows. We like looking at the trees. If you had this room and you didn't have windows, it would be the same room. We wouldn't like it as much. Why do we spend the time in the windows and spend more energy because we have to heat the room? Some of the energy goes through the windows because we like Mother Nature. And if you don't spend time with Mother Nature, you should. It's incredibly important. It nourishes the soul. I don't listen to music that I like regularly. Music nourishes the soul. Why do we listen to music? It's earthy. Cavemen and cavewomen did music. We're now discovering that. So in Judaism, at the beginning of the new year, they blow a ram's horn, which is supposed to bring a new year. The mythology is God opens up the book of life 10 days later, and Yom Kippur closes it, and your name is written in the book of life, whether you're living or dying. It's not something I believe in, but I kind of like the ritual. And I like the ritual of listening to the horn. So I listened to, there were two horns. One is a small horn, and one was a horn of it wasn't a ram, it was probably an elk's horn, huge horn, and a couple of people learned how to play it. Well, that's ancient. You know that men and women were playing horns from animals and dancing when they got together. Music is earthy and is universal. You may want to spend time with music, live music. I rarely go to art museums or museums that you like. It doesn't have to be art. Anything else. Museums are good. Often that's a good time to go with your grandchildren because they're things. And we used to go to museums. We went with our kids. We went to Europe a few times, and a friend of ours was a docent at the Louvre, and she said, what you do is you go to the gift shop, and everyone picks out 3 or 4 or 5 postcards, and they buy them. And then you go on a hunt for those pictures around the museum. And when you look at everyone gets this piece on their postcard, you're out of there. So it immediately encourages grandchildren because it's a gamey thing. So I recommend that. Arts Institute, incredibly good. And of course, Milwaukee's museum is good, but no comparison to the Art Institute. I rarely visit beautiful places at home or when traveling. Something you should do. Financial busters. Let's go into environment, and then I'm going to tell you what you're going to do with all this. Once again, I worry about money. Check it off. I feel overwhelmed by too much debt. Check it off. Things you may have to do. I spend too much money. Check it off. I'm a compulsive shopper that buys too much. If you are, check it off. I haven't saved for retirement. Big issue. Big issue. I don't have a will. So all of you should have a power of attorney. Very important. And I didn't mention that, but that's extremely important. And the reason why, power of attorney is somebody else gets to make the decision for you. If it's not signed and dated correctly, and check it, that's important, then it may not be activated when you need to have it. Power of attorney for health means somebody else gets to make the decision whether or not to put you on a ventilator or not, and when to pull the plug if you're on the ventilator. And you want a loved one to make that decision. And you want them to make the decision. You want to tell them what to do. So I'm going to give you something called the seagull effect. I did not coin the term. A guy named Atul Gawande, an incredible writer and physician, coined the term. Here it is. Agnes is dying, and she has 4 or 5 children. And 4 of them live in town, and 1 lives out of town, lives, we'll say, out in California. And they've all decided what they're going to do because Agnes is near death. And the other person flies in, this is the seagull effects, and shits on the plan. They don't like it because they haven't been it. And you've got to be careful of the seagull effect. It really is the case. So everyone wants to be on the right page if you need them, if you develop dementia. And the way to do that is tell them. Tell them. I want to be kept alive at all costs. Probably not. But if I don't know who I am and if I'm a vegetative state, you can pull the plug. Give them permission. They're usually your children or loved one. But it's very important to have a living will. It's not a living will, it's a power of attorney. That's the strong thing. It says you get to make all the decisions. But you also need to have a will. Something like 30% of Wisconsinites, big number, don't have a will. You can get a simple will. In the state of Wisconsin, you can still, used to be able to go to the university bookstore and get a paper will, and you just wrote it down and signed it. You don't even need a lawyer to do a will. You can go to a website. You do not need a lawyer to make a will. You can go to a website, put things on the will, and then you go get it notarized. You do have to have it notarized. That's it. If you want to know where to keep it, you don't have to keep it in the safety deposit box. You can have it filed with Dane County. Because when you die, the will is filed with Dane County. But it turns out you can file it with Dane County when you have it. And then it's actually in the county. So nobody's looking for the will. It's there. And that's good. That's where our will is. I didn't know about that. Yes?
About the health power of attorney, it's also important to have it given to the UW hospital or wherever you know.
It should be in your electronic medical record. Right. It should be in the EMR. Yeah. And everyone should have that in the EMR. So then it can be seen. That's a very good point anywhere. Occupational busters. I'm not satisfied with my occupation. I don't like where I work. I have a job that's dangerous. That's really important. If you look at spring-winter marriages that occurred 100 years ago compared to now, that's where generally an old guy married a young woman. The number of marriages, this is from the State Historical Society, I think the data was from 2015, was the same over 100 years later than it was. So roughly, we'll say in 1920, the number of spring-winter marriages were the same as the year 2020. But in 1920, it's mostly because men died, and then women needed to have usually economic relief because they often had children, and men needed to have somebody take care of them. So that was it. So that's very important if you have a dangerous job to try to get from that. I don't have job benefits for most of you. That's not here. And I don't have a retirement plan. And then there are environmental busters. I don't like the location of my home. I don't live in a safe neighborhood. I don't make my house as clean, organized as I would like it to be. I would like to be. It doesn't have to be obsessive compulsive. It has to be what you're comfortable with, because that's really important. You don't want to be a hoarder, but for some people, having 10 things on the shelf is a hoarder, and they want to have it Zen-like. Whatever fits you. You want to look and see. I don't have smoke detectors with batteries. Very important, working smoke detectors. I don't have carbon monoxide monitors. You've got to have that in your house. Too much is done. I have a gun in the house, but it's not safely stored. And then I use, in the summer, pesticides, weed killers on my lawn where I sit. Here's what I want you to do, okay? I want you to look back at the sheets of paper, okay? I'm going to give you this. This is what I want you to do. And you can do this if you want to, but this is part of the workshop. I want you to pick out from physical, mental, family and social, spiritual, and material, one thing that you think is the most important thing to do, okay? So you're going to pick out one important, and you're going to put a big I next to it, okay? You're going to encircle it. That's what I want you to do. And I'm going to give you 5 minutes. I'm going to tell you, and you're going to get some postcards out of this too. So I'm going to give you a few minutes. All I want you to do is pick out one from each sphere. Actually, I'll give you 3 minutes. And pick out the most important thing for you Pick out one thing you think is the most important. It doesn't matter, just, it can be random if you're not sure which is the most important, but I want you to pick out one thing that you think is the most important to your health, okay? From physical, one from physical, one from physical, one from mental, one from family and social, one from spiritual, one from material. I just want one in each of the 5 spheres. That's all. I want one. And pick out one. You're going to take these home anyway with you, and you may change it. So just one from the 5 spheres, not from these subcategories. You just pick out one. It may be, oh, I had a Mediterranean diet, or I have to quit smoking. But one from physical, one from mental, one from family and social, one from spiritual, and one from material with an I. Yes? Pardon me?
What if you don't have one of the ones that are listed?
Oh, then you can write down if there's something else you think of. But if not, pick something that you can do a better job with. In other words, there may be something. I mean, none of us, something, you may say, well, there isn't one, everything is good. Well, pick one that you think you could improve on it. That's a very good point. And then I'll give you what the next thing is while you're doing that. I want you to pick one that is the easiest, okay? Now, the easiest may also be the most important. Okay, so here is the last step. I'm going to give you plenty of time to do this. You've got, we'll say 10 things there. 5 easy things, 5 important things, maybe less. I'm going to pass out postcards, okay? And what I want you to do, you've got 5 important things, 5 easy things. On one side of the postcard, I want you to write 2 things. Pick out 2 things. Probably pick out one easy and one important, you know what I mean? Pick out 2 things. Write that on one side of the postcard. On the other side of the postcard, I want you to write your name and address, okay? Now, when you get this in the mail 2 months from now, because I'm going to mail these out, feel free not to, if you don't want me to look at them, don't give this to me, because I am going to look at them. I look at all the postcards. I kind of like to look at them. The first thing you're going to see when you look in the post office, you're going to say, my God, that looks like my handwriting. Guess what? It is your handwriting. And the reason is this is something that I want you to remind yourself, because you should take action. So 2 months from now, roughly, so we're kind of on the 20th of September, 20th October, 20th of November, before Thanksgiving, you're going to get this postcard in the mail, okay? Once again, if you don't want to do it, don't give it to me. And you're going to write down 2 things, and it's going to remind you what you actually do, because the goal behind the workshop is to pick out 2 things to take action, because I believe it's the small steps that end up producing the best results. It's not, I'm going to lose 50 pounds. It's that I'm going to eat better. There's a difference between that. And I think it's the small steps that make a difference in longevity. And you can pick out 2 things. That's all. I don't want 10 things, 2 things. You can pick out more if you want to. But I think generally 2 is good. You want to pick out more, you pick out more. But I will mail this, I'm going to mail this out before, you will get this around the time of Thanksgiving, okay? And I hope this helps. So once again, put your name on one side, obviously where the stamp is, the other side, and I promise you, when you see the writing 2 months from now, you will think, and you'll laugh with a chuckle, gosh, that looks like my handwriting. I just promise you. That'll be, at least for me, it's kind of the first thing that pops up, because when I arrange we go to APT, and I address, and I'm in charge of the tickets, and then I put an envelope in there so people can send me checks. And when it comes back in the mail, I always look and go, God, looks like right, it's my handwriting. Okay, so I'll finish up with Venezuela. Yes? One that you find is important, and one that is easy. And they may be the same thing. They may turn out to be the same thing. But the goal, once again, is to get you to take action for you. And I want you to keep track of it and look at it, because I want you to put the postcards up here when you're done, because I'm going to take them back and do that. But keep track of it, and then take action. If you don't take action, what is it? It really doesn't have the same import. And it is these little things that make a difference. That's why we're living longer. We've gained 10 years of longevity since LBJ was president in people who are 50 years of age and older. It's enormous. That's more longevity that is gained any other time in human history, and has a lot to do with a whole bunch of things, changes in health habits and others. Any questions before I tell you about So carjacking in Venezuela, I'll give you the short version. Well, so I'm on my way to the airport. I'm speaking about health and wellness and pain, not paying attention as if it would matter. Coming out of a Radisson hotel, I mean, a nice hotel in Caracas, but I mean, not like the Four Seasons, you know, which I've never been to, you know, or the Ritz. But, and I'm on the way to the airport. It's 4 o'clock in the morning because I want to be there. The flight's like at 7, not even thinking it's the middle of the night. And we're getting off the highway. The car is there. I'm in a minivan, and I don't speak any Spanish. You know, maybe I have 10 words. I'm not good at language. And all of a sudden, a car in front, like a movie, turns in front and starts to turn and block us. And 2 masked gunmen with semi-automatic guns run out of the car towards me and my car. And my first thought is, I'll shut the window. I'll shut the window. Obviously, I didn't shut the window. So there are 3 people, 1 in the car in front and these 2 guys. So they get into the car, and off we go. There's 1 guy, 2 guys in the front seat, a driver and the person in the passenger seat. What did we call it? There was another word for the passenger seat. I can't remember. My kids, what is it? Shotgun, thank you, shotgun. I was trying to think of a shotgun from the Westerns in the passenger seat, and I being carjacked. And nobody, and I thought to myself, I have to get to a place of comfort because I'm really scared. And I was done Zen meditation for a number of years, and I immediately had fear on one shoulder, my left shoulder, and calmness on my other shoulder. I could visualize it. And I went to the right shoulder, and I said, I'm going to stay there. I have to figure out what to do, and I decided they have to know that they have control. So I looked at my Timex. I didn't have an Apple Watch, and I said, Aeroporto? Aeroporto? No response. Aeroporto? Aeroporto? Like, are you taking me to the airport? And they start laughing under their ski masks. And I'm sure they're saying in Spanish, this poor blah, 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 thinks we're going to the airport. And I got to come to Aeroporto. It's really hot. And this guy takes off the ski mask and says, shh, shh, shh. So then they knew that they had control over the situation. I mean, so everything calmed down a little bit. I still have fear on one shoulder and calmness on the other shoulder because I don't know what to do. I'm being carjacked. So I thought, we're going to go somewhere. If I'm nice and I do my stuff, maybe they won't put me in the ground and maybe they'll feed me. I'm being carjacked. I'm not in a war situation. I'm being carjacked, so for money. But meanwhile, I know Penny is in Vietnam because I'm going to be speaking in Australia. And she left early. She was always an adventurer. And all my kids are in various places. One is in France. I mean, they're all in like the years abroad, Argentina, Mexico. And I'm thinking, I don't know what's going to happen here. You know, and of course, there's no cell phone. I did not have a cell phone in those days. So we go for about 15 minutes and stop. And I just spoken to my friend Renee because he was with me lecturing from Germany, but he had lived in South Africa. And we were talking about carjacking. And he said in South Africa, they never kill you in the car because the car is not worth that much because there's blood on the seat. So they get us out of the car. And I thought, I'm going to be killed. So if they hit my head, I'm gone when they hit my head. If they hit my heart, if it's not too much pain, I've got about 2 or 3 minutes in consciousness. I'm not going to think about them. That's what I thought. Think about Penny. I'm going to think about the kids. So meanwhile, they took the stuff. I don't have very much stuff. I have a little knapsack and some other things. And then they wanted me to get undressed, and I said no. I thought if they're going to kill me, I'm not going to be naked, whatever that is. I just wasn't going to do that. But then I thought they probably want to know if I have a money belt. So I opened up everything and opened up my underwear because I thought maybe they're looking for that, which I'm sure is what they had. And then after that, I pointed to my Timex. I took it out, handed it to them. I wanted to let them know they had everything. He looked at the watch, and I'm forgetting, and he threw it on the ground. And I picked up the watch and gave it to him. I had a Timex. I didn't have a Rolex. The Timex. I mean, I had like a Casio, It's not worth that much. I was in a nice hotel. But it was very much. And also, I'm a family doctor. I had $100 with me. I didn't have $1,000. I'm not an orthopedic surgeon. I'm a family doctor. Sorry, orthopedic surgeons. I always say that. So then they get back in the car, turn on the engine. One person talks to the other person, whatever they're saying. turn off the engine. One guy, the driver gets out of the car. The other guy, they don't have their masks on anymore. He's probably in his 20s. Points a gun right at my head and says in English, perfect English with a Spanish accent, "Welcome to Venezuela." And they leave. They leave. They could have hit me. They could have pistol whipped me. They could have shot me in the foot because I caused them all this. They thought they were going to, they were going to extort money from me, and I was worth something. In the end, they probably said to one another, "This was the wrong person to carjack. It's not worth doing." Or because I was really nice, part of it. I mean, if I didn't have a lot of money, but then they said, "Why should, this is not somebody who we're going to carjack and try to ransom. Not worth it." But I was really nice. So they never touched me. And really kind of interesting when I think back to it. Well, then they threw the keys in the bushes. Then the driver, who doesn't speak English, is very upset. We're looking for it. But I worked in slum before. In Chicago, I worked in Cabrini Green at Head Start. So I know that most people who are in those situations are actually really nice. And I just have to make it back hotel. I don't have any money or identification, but they're gone. And I'm still got my adrenaline going. I'm not concerned because they're gone. I'm not going to die in the slum. That's not what's going to happen. So we finally find the keys. He wants to take me to the airport. I don't have an identification. Really? I'm not going to do it. So I convinced him to go back to the hotel by just saying hotel and insisting. My friend Rene, who was from Germany, I knew he wasn't leaving until the evening. We get back to the hotel. Rene speaks fluent in Spanish. Comes down and says, "Oh my God." And then he goes, "Well, let's go to the airport to try to get you on the airplane." I said, "It's not going to work." He said, "Well, let's try. I don't have identification." So we head off to the airport, go to the airport. The airport in Caracas is kind of chaotic. We go to the first class line. Not in first class, I'm in steerage. But go to the first class, get up to the line, and he says, "I want to get him on the airplane. This is what happened." And she said, "You don't have identification. Can't do anything for you. You should call the embassy." And he said, "Well, can you call the embassy?" And she said, "No, you can use the payphone over there." And the payphone is obviously broken. And he said, "I am German. You are going to call the embassy or I am not leaving this line." And within a minute, the embassy was on the phone. He knew how to do that stuff. Very nice. Are you hurt? Are you injured? Are you safe? Do you have clothing? Do you have any food? And by the way, I can't get you a letter right away. I'm not sure we can do it because it's Carnival and we're closed for 3 days. But I'll call Ed, somebody named Ed, and they may be able to make a letter for you, and I will get back to you if you call up. Really nice. Which, by the way, it turned out they were able to do. They were going to go out of their way during the holiday and go to the embassy and get a letter. So we get back to the hotel. Now I'm besides myself. I mean, the adrenaline is gone. And Renee said to me, "Go up to your room," because I had not checked out of the room because the hotel was all sort of crazy. He was checking me out. "And think about everything you had lost and do that. And then I'll meet you in an hour downstairs and we'll go get ice cream." That's when I lost it. I'm in bed, I'm crying, in a fetal position. I mean, all my emotions. I mean, I'm like anybody else. You get emotional after these things. And I think about everything that was in, he said, "Just this centers your mind." I didn't write it on paper. So we go out, get ice cream. We'll deal with this the next day because they said we can make something at the embassy. So then at 10 o'clock at night, I get a call that goes through the hotel operator from a woman named Mrs. Gladys, who had been calling, who found, I have everything in a FedEx envelope, found my passport in a garbage can. Because outside of a warung, which is a place where you eat. And I always have a card of the hotel that I'm at, because I always do that in case I lose anything. And so I go to Renee's room, and I said, "Here's her number, here's her cell phone," or whatever the phone. "Let's go and get it." And he looks at me, he goes, 10 o'clock at night, Caracas, going to get it? I don't think so. Calls her up and says, "Can we meet you somewhere?" We decide meeting at the airport is probably the safest because there's security. And she goes, "Okay." And he goes, "I'm not sure about the way she sounds." So the next morning we go to the airport with another person who was at the group, who also talked to her that night. And it's Carnival, so it should be a half an hour. It takes us like an hour and a half to get to the airport because there are other parades. We wait for her for an hour. Nothing happens. She doesn't show up. So we're going to go back to the embassy. The guy is going to I'm going to get out of there, is going to make it. And then all of a sudden, this woman shows up, at security. We're in the airport with all my stuff, the kindness of strangers, and hugs me. She thought I was dead, and hugs me and gives me my passport. That's all I have. And so I went with Renee to get this ticket. And I told them, I am not going to pay for a cancellation fee because I was carjacked. I was not going to pay $150 to do that. The woman said, don't worry, you're not going to charge you $150. And then I made it back. So I made it back. Other story, I made it back to Madison, back. And my friend, Ken Robbins, who is a psychiatrist, said, you're at risk for PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. I said, I don't think so. I said, you are. So he said, there are 3 things I recommend. Number 1, you need something to go to sleep. I'm going to do a prescription because you may have nightmares. Number 2, you should every single day, during the day, have times that you tell the story to yourself. So when you have intrusive thoughts, you say, I'm not going to tell myself the story. I'm going to do it at 10 o'clock or 12 o'clock. And then absent yourself from other people and do it. So maybe 5, 6 times a day, like at 10, 12, 2, 4, 6, 8, I would tell the story of the carjacking to myself. That was really important. So if it was 3 and I was thinking about it, I'd say, I'm not going to think about it, but I'm going to tell my story from start to finish. He said, and that will help you own the story so the story doesn't own you. And then he said, tell it to as many people as you can. So I told it, and it was the front page of the newspaper. Dr. Paster hijacked in Venezuela. So I'd be standing at the pump on Fish Hatchery Road, and people would say to me, hey, Doc, how's Caracas? And I would laugh, and I said, it's okay, you going back there? I don't think so. I don't think you should go back there. And it was sort of funny, but it really was good. So eventually, I own the story, so the story doesn't own me. And it took about a year before I could own the story, so I can tell it without emotional impact. So that was it. But what helped me with this was not that I took a vitamin, was not that I exercise, was not that I follow a Mediterranean diet. It wasn't that I floss my teeth. It was the social relationships. I had to do this for my family. And it was my mental aspect of the fact that I knew, because of meditation, how to calm myself in a difficult situation. Probably also because the doctor, so I'm used to working in chaotic situations. That's what actually saved me. I could easily have been injured or just shot and say, well, it's not worth it, let's just kill him. Those are the things that actually saved me. And that's why you have to look at your 5 spheres. It's all 5. Pick things that make a difference, and you will live a long, sweet life. And thank you very much. Thanks. And give me your postcards. Drop them off. If you don't want to, you don't have to. But they're for you. Here, put them in.